more Stimme. Hello and a very warm welcome to Engineered Unicorns, fantastic books for a magical lifestyle. My name is SandyJ and you are listening to Campusradio Karlsruhe. Be careful what you wish for. I think there's an expression like this in every language on this earth, and it's so true. I just learned this last month again, not only in my private life, but also in the book that I want to talk about later in this episode. But first, as always, we start with what happened in January. In January, I not only had a long manga weekend again, which led to me reading more than 20 mangas, which essentially meant that I'm already done with my Goodreads goal for this year. And so far I'm at 37 books this year that I finished. Naturally, a lot of those books are mangas. I also read a ton of audiobooks, and 2 of those were on my physical TBR, so I can just donate those books later on. And I will give them to the American Library because they don't have them currently in their catalog, so they will get the physical books of those. And I quite enjoyed this audiobook ride because I felt an innate pressure to read a ton of audiobooks. And I did. And now I'm currently on hiatus from audiobooks. I'm currently reading just one book, which is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. And I love this book so far. It's really special and I quite enjoy it. And I'm not reading anything else, which is unusual because normally I always have several books on the go, but currently I just read that book. Also, I just said in the last episode that I don't usually use my tablet anymore to read, and currently I'm reading mainly on a tablet. It's like I got a reminder that tablet reading is also quite nice as long as you don't go into the park. Another thing that I did literary-wise in January was taking a literary criticism class, and it was held by a journalist from another radio station. She taught us quite a bit. She did cultural journalism for more than 20 years now, so she knows a lot about literature and about how to present literature in the public radio realm in Germany. The class was really interesting. We compared different ways to talk about the book in different media. It started out with the Amazon page. It went over to just normal papers. So we did use the online version of the paper. And then we went on to different versions of radio criticism or book talks and reviews. And then we even watched an interview with the author and literary critic, all about the same book by Benedict Wells. The book is called Heartland. It's a German author and it's a coming-of-age novel, and he has a ton of cultural references in this work, and the reviews and thoughts on those books, depending on where you looked and how they were made, were very different. And because we compared different versions of book talks or book reviews all on the same book, we got a very good overview over how those different reviews and book talks work, how different you can make them, and on what you can focus on those reviews. As I've said before, I don't like German as a language. I don't like German writing. Most of the time, you lose something in the translation. And so I switched to reading English originals. This is why I'm also doing this podcast in English, because I read mainly English. However, regarding that book, it was quite funny because when we started out with the Amazon reviews of Heartland by Benedict Wells, it was really interesting. The further we got into those reviews and the different ways, there was one book review talk where two women who had both read the book, I actually got a very, very good idea about the novel. I also found it very interesting how different the perceptions were of the reviewers of the novel and what some liked about the novel from the writing style, others really disliked because they thought it was too easy. This is a thing that I noticed in literary criticism, in the classic literary criticism that you find in the old school media, like papers or of public TV or public radio. It's still very focused on literary fiction, and they also don't like books that use a language that is closer to the everyday language that is easy to read. And sometimes I feel that literary criticism, the old school kind, is still very snobby. And we learned what also is considered a normal classic review. Essentially, you can do it in every way, but naturally there are some restrictions when you write reviews. Then it's the word count, and in case of classic radio, you often have a minute count. The amount that we were given was 6 minutes per book when you do a classic radio review. My stuff is more long-form book talk, and I thought about it quite some time over the last few weeks. So definitely be careful what you wish for when you learn about new stuff. It means you will have to rethink all your points of view. For 2 or 3 days, I was really questioning what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. But essentially, I'm doing long-form book talk about books. I'm not a reviewer in the classic sense. And I think that's fine, because books are for readers and the bookish community is big enough for all of us. Now, as you may have noticed, we have February, and this means the new lunar year has started, and it's the year of the water tiger in the Chinese zodiac. With that, we are getting actually to the book recommendation. As I've said before, I want to read more Asian authors. I started out the year with mostly Japanese authors in the case of manga. The book that I want to recommend to you is by the Chinese author Mo Xiang Tong Xiu. I hope I pronounced this right. I looked for pronunciation guides, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm trying my best here. But I don't speak Mandarin, so Mo Xiang Tong Xiu writes Danmei books. Danmei is a Chinese genre which is comparable with the Japanese boys' love genre. They are rated 70 plus. Mo Xiang Tong Xiu is relatively well known. There's a big fan base internationally because her works have been adapted to TV dramas like The Untamed, which you can even find on Netflix, also manhwas or even animes. And now, finally, there are English editions of her finished novels. There haven't been official translations until December last year. And the special thing about those translations is actually that the translations were done by fans. So in every novel, there are different translators and editors. And also there's fan art inside those books used to depict the characters, and they are quite nice. And they are fully licensed, so also the translators and the author and the artists are getting their due. This is quite special because there wasn't so far an official English translation, and this way we can enjoy those novels when we haven't the necessary knowledge to read those books in the original Chinese. The publisher is Seven Seas Entertainments. It's a company based in California, and they will bring out the different volumes of those novels over the next year. And the special thing also about those novels is that started out as serialized web novels. So serialized novels have quite an impressive history because, as you may know, Charles Dickens also serialized his novels first. Mo Xiang Tong Xiu did this with her novels on a website. I want to talk about the Scum Villains Self-Saving System. It's a fun novel, so you could compare it when you think of Western writers to T.J. Klune with The Lightning Struck Hard and to Terry Pratchett, because there are those self-awareness things that you have also in Terry Pratchett and the gayness and snarkiness that you have in T.J. Klune's books. I read so far volume 1, and it's the first volume of 4, so it's actually the shortest of those 3 books. The other 2 books are called Heaven Official's Blessing and Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. I found these books first because I saw a picture of them on Bookdragon, but I didn't really think about it. And then I saw a big blog post on Tor.com. There's even reviews of those books on Tor.com on the blog. However, I recommend to first read the books for one very simple reason. There are spoilers in the reviews of those books. I mean, the review is amazingly written, but there's a major spoiler. And so I recommend to first get the book and read it if you are annoyed at spoilers. And in my case, I was lucky that I didn't read the review before I started reading the Scum Villains System, because I was howling when I saw that plot point. And I would have really disliked it if I was spoiled for that plot point. So the Scum Villains Self-Saving System is special in that regard that it, again, with today's theme, just fits. Be careful what you wish for. Essentially, it's that way that a reader of a web novel gets pulled in the same web novel. He then isn't the main protagonist of the web novel, but instead he's a villain. And so he has to deal with it. And again, be careful what you wish for, because it might not be the way you want it. And Shen Yuan, or Shenzhenchu, as he is called in the novel then as the villain, has quite the dire end. The thing about the Scum Villains system is that you start out actually with the inner novel. So you get the plot of the inner novel, which is about a hero called, or anti-hero, Luo Binghe, and is way through the cultivation world, and he essentially later on kills his master. And Shen Yuan, our main protagonist, becomes the master, and he has to deal with bringing Luo Binghe on his side. And for that, he is coached by a system. As in RPG, you know, there's a system that's telling you what you can do as a character, and then you get points. And that's the same in this novel. So Shen Yuan has to deal with the system, and this is also a very, very amusing part of the novel. So he's bantering with it. And then he has to deal with all the stuff happening in that novel. And the fun other thing is that he actually doesn't like the novel that he's trapped in. When he read it, he was one of the readers who voiced his disgust with certain plot points and the way the whole novel developed. And now he's inside it and has to deal with it. There's one part where he's saying that he has to use a shovel to fill in the plot holes in the novel. So it's quite fun to read it. And I want to give you some examples, some citations of the novel. It's quite funny how Shen Yuan, or Shenzhenchu as he's called then in the novel that he's put into, is seeing it. When faced with a protagonist, every single character acted like his total edgelord aura had devoured their intelligence, especially Luo Bing's master Shenzhenchu, that idiot among idiots, scum among scum. His only purpose was to dig his own grave, and he hadn't even managed to finish before he was killed by the protagonist instead. What I liked also, as I've said before, was the banter with the system, because the system is telling Shenzhenchu Shen Yuan how to deal with certain issues in this and what he has to do, because he has to not only try to get Luo Bing to not hate him, to kill him, but he has to also do it within means of a story and within the way his character is actually written in the first place. So he has certain boundaries that he has to deal with. Are you kidding? Shenzhenchu muttered in his head. In the end, this is still a cultivation setting. Why aren't we flying on swords? Even in a magical setting like Harry Potter, not every wizard goes out riding brooms, the system coolly replied. It would be too conspicuous. You sure are not knowledgeable, Shenzhenchu muttered. Did you do business over at Harry Potter's before? The system typed out a giant line of hovering symbols, ... In all these years of the system's operation, Shenzhenchu might have been the first person born enough to act so familiarly with it, let alone fuck around with it. That's always quite enjoyable to read the interactions between the main protagonist and the system. Then something that I also quite liked was how descriptions are different from Western descriptions. Let me give you a few examples. On top of that, he walked and moved with a shining air. Who would ever guess that this was Xinjiang Peak's most miserable flower bud, which had been ravaged by wind and rain for many years? And then there's another part. As expected, he received no response. Shenzhenchu didn't mind. It was enough to express his kind wishes. With a sweep of his ham, he exited the caves like the wind whispered beneath his feet, ready to welcome the approaching storm. So I really like those descriptions because somehow in the Western fantasy you don't have them. There's also the fact that Shenzhenchu, he's not the most reliable narrator. He doesn't seem to notice that when he changes his actions and his behavior, this means that the characters around him start to perceive him differently. And he's quite surprised about this. And Mo Xiang Tong Xiu, the author, does a very good job to show that what he thinks he does and the other persons perceive and think about his behavior are very different. I've hardly ever seen it done this way, and I quite enjoy it because it's always interesting to see how different perceptions can be in any kind of setting. This is one of the reasons why I quite like this book, and the writing is very, very good. and so is the translation by Felicity and Lily. The illustrations are by Xiao Tong Xiu, and as I've said before, the author is Mo Xiang Tong Xiu, the Scum Villains Self-Saving System. The first volume of 4 is already out. The second volume of this book will be out in April this year, and you can get an ebook version or a print version. I personally prefer the print version in this case, and you have quite a lot of illustrations throughout the novel. You have character drawings in the back, and there's also a very long glossary with explanations of the titles, of pronunciation. Unfortunately not for the author's name, but for the names of the protagonists. You have the pronunciation guide, and then there's also cultural information, not only for the pop culture references that are strewn throughout the text of the novel as a footnote. In that regard, it's comparable to Terry Pratchett, who also used footnotes, though he made them more about funny side story. But in this case, there are cultural references that are explained, and then there are longer explanations about genres and other stuff in this book, and informations about locations and all those necessary information, because this world might be not that well known to readers in the Western Hemisphere or non-Chinese speaking. Last but not least, you should know, because it's Danmei, they are rated 70 plus, so this is definitely not a novel for children. Be aware of that. Nevertheless, this book, this first volume, is still pretty tame, but you really want to know how the story progresses. So I really enjoyed it, how the characters are described, how the story progresses, and the language used, and how there are tons of pop culture references. There are even emoticons in the text. The author makes fun of herself and she makes fun of the readers, but always in a lovingly way. It's a nod to the fan base too. And if you want to read something different from the usual Western fantasy and you want to laugh a lot and find yourself in the pages, then this might be just the book that you want. You can get those books, as I've said before, as a print and as an ebook version at your favorite bookstore. The Scum Villains Self-Saving System by Mo Xiang Tong Xiu. As I've noticed over the holidays, it's a good thing to take some time off. So the next episode will be out in May. Until then, I hope you have a good spring, and if you want to read some stuff, you will find the book recommendations in this episode's show notes, and the book recommendation list on the website of Campusradio Karlsruhe will also be updated. Then I noticed that the Libby account by the Karlsruhe library system has some new fantasy books, so check them out. And there's also new fantasy books at the American library, so you can find something interesting there. Even the Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. This was Engineered Unicorns, fantastic books for a magical lifestyle. My name is SandyJ. Music as always is by Erwin Schmidt. See you soon.